Spooky season is now upon us, and with it comes many frightening things like accountability, responsibility, and discussions of all things terrifying. One of my favorite spooky topics is the unexplained, a mysterious realm of intrigue and wonder, one that offers very little explanation for the questions it poses. And it is here that we find the students of NRC. All our favorite boys have been gearing up to hunt down some cryptids to either prove or disprove their existence, and they're bringing us along for the journey. I cannot tell you why cryptozoology has become such a hot topic on campus, nor if any of the boys truly understand the difference between cryptid and folk monster. But I can tell you which cryptids the boys ran into on their outing and why they were drawn together. Along the way, we'll be discussing EN server story content, so consider this your spoiler warning. Now then, grab your cameras, night vision goggles, and provisions, because we're about to head into the deep woods. Our first adventuring team is Hartsville Dorm, who, along with Grim and Jew, are seeking out a variety of cryptids for this project. Most of the boys are looking to disprove their existence, while some are super excited to catch something cannibal, with one really hoping for a normal trip with no emergencies. Grim, though, has been specifically tasked with finding a flashlight frog with a blue light, which may or may not have been a task given to him to help him feel more included while keeping him out of the way of the true hunts. These cryptids are relatively benign tree frogs with a special adaptation on their snout, one that flashes light to attract insects into its hungry mouth, kind of like an anglerfish. Given Grimm's propensity for eating and his toddler-like nature, this cryptid seemed like a rather fitting one to give him. In this world of magic, flashlight frogs would be a very believable creature, one that would be easy to spot in theory, and I like the idea that parents in this world often use these cryptids as an excuse to get their young children more involved in camping trips. The thrill of looking through a field of fireflies in summer and trying to find the one blinking light that's a different color seems like a relatively harmless task to give a wee one, like Grim, to keep them occupied. Riddle could even back up this fictional activity by talking about bioluminescence in frogs that actually exist, hooking Grim completely on the task. Riddle, on the other hand, has taken a more academic approach to his target because he seeks to solve the mystery of bloop. That's right, bloop. The mysterious underwater noise that was assumed to have been created by an unknown marine creature when it was initially discovered. I think this sort of mystery could appeal to Riddle's knowledge-seeking side since he likes to do research and stay on top of various relevant topics. And I think Trey or Cater could have pitched cryptids to him in this way to make them more relevant or interesting to Riddle. Given what we see during Spectral Soiree, it seems like Riddle has to see academic value in a pursuit before he pursues it, and puzzles especially catch his interest since they're one of his hobbies. Many cryptids can get written off as fan fiction, but I think one like Bloop would be right up Riddle's puzzle-solving alley. He might even already be aware of it and the research being done around it, but if not, I can see him diving into related research to formulate a hypothesis. Eventually, I'm sure he'd come to some sort of science-backed conclusion, or at least that would be my hope. Fortunately or unfortunately, Bloop was actually determined by Noah to be consistent with noises caused by glacial movements, so the cryptid does indeed have a scientific answer, one that maybe Riddle could have discovered during his investigation. I also like to think that despite this evidence, Floyd, specifically, tells Riddle he's wrong, that Bloop really is made by a marine animal, one that Floyd has seen but can't describe, and other assorted vague details that drive Riddle up a tree. The classic, I'm a merman who lives in the sea, so how can you tell me I'm wrong about the sea maneuver? Fielding quite a bit of Riddle's anger in that later case would be Trey, who similarly to Grim is on the lookout for some frogs. Not just any frogs, but the Loveland frogmen. These are Grim-sized frogs that are said to live near Loveland, Ohio, and honestly this comparison was just a vibe thing to me. I don't know what about this image in particular screams Trey, but it does to me, so he's gonna be compared to these guys. Some cryptids have really crazy and intricate lore, but these frogmen are just human child-sized frogs, and as far as I'm concerned, that makes them pretty run-of-the-mill. Perhaps even normal. They really don't have any sort of power or specialty, they're just big, and they can allegedly use sticks as tools, which may indicate that they have their own human-like society, or at very least a primitive one. But that's kind of it. Sure, there are various sightings and the details have changed a bit over the years, but I just can't help but feel like they have such an immaculately Trey vibe. Plus, they could also be spun as a genetically mutated version of a frog, which could possibly pique Riddle's interest enough to approve of Trey's trip to the woods. Who can say? But I think that's about as much as I can say here for Trey, as he's most likely just going to be going on this little expedition to keep everyone else in line during the cryptid hunt, and not looking seriously for the frogmen if he were in such a place at such a time. Gator, though, is on the lookout for a very mysterious creature, one that no one has seen with their own eyes, but one that their cameras have absolutely picked up on, and that's the air rod or air fish. This cryptid is actually, spoiler alert, just a video artifact caused by motion blur, which is why no one has seen them outside of photos. However, there are some more conspiratorial theories that claim that these might be some form of atmospheric being or even a tear in the fabric of reality. I think during the cryptid craze, Cater might be able to convince some folks that these are in fact real creatures so he can have some Magicam buddies, sort of like how he convinced Jack to find hidden foxes with him in Playful Land. Maybe Cater even took some pictures of the Octavanel trio attempting to fly and dubbed them airfish. Who can say for sure? But I think making something mystical out of the mundane seems to be something that Cater would jive with. I also think these cryptids would be something Riddle would allow Cater to hunt, since they involve a bit of photographic knowledge and some skill to pull them off well. If for some reason Riddle was the determining factor, I don't know why I've made Riddle the determining factor of who can and cannot go after cryptids. I don't think Riddle would have that much of a say, but in a way, for Cater, this is a bit of a scientific endeavor, so it would be really easy for him to rationalize it to Riddle, plus it'll probably do some numbers on Magicam as it might be trending during this craze. It could even be a whole series with like behind the scenes footage that Cater could milk for a bit while the craze is still active, showing people how he could create this so-called cryptid and teach people a little bit about photography, perhaps. Who knows? Deuce, though, has his heart set on finding a drop bear to prove to Ace that they do in fact exist, and that if Ace ran into one, he would not be able to defeat it on his own. That is where this particular interest stems from, as the two had a bit of a debate over whether they could take on certain cryptids in a fight, and then the drop bear became quite the point of contention. These are cute little koalas that turn into very violent koalas that drop on those who pass by their trees to attack them. They are also supposedly bloodthirsty creatures that never back down from a fight, kinda like delinquent Deuce in a way, which I think is another natural tie for him here. Koalas are normally cute and relatively gentle, which is how Deuce normally is too. However, if you mess around with Deuce and his friends or his family, boy howdy, you better be ready for that cauldron. Drop bears too, in this way, kinda turn on you as you expect them to be a regular old koala until they are on your head pounding away. Now, these scientific creatures have been debunked as an urban legend, and I think Ace would have likely tried to tell this to Deuce during their argument, but Deuce wasn't having it. And he is also someone who believed every egg was fertilized, so I don't think it would be too much of a stretch for him to be convinced that these creatures are real. Perhaps his inclusion on the cryptid hunting Huxtable team is specifically to teach him that these creatures don't exist and to never trust everything you read. Or perhaps they just needed some more muscle, and Deuce was the perfect defender. Could be either, honestly. Ace is either on the hunt for or acting as the Sandown Clown, because I feel like Ace is a bit of a clown himself in some instances. However, I'm more so drawn to this option because I just think he'd be super great with kids. This cryptid is a robot-esque, perhaps extraterrestrial adjacent clown that entertained a couple of kids while they were on vacation in Lake Common, Sandown, Isle of Wight, UK. This apparently was the only sighting of this particular cryptid, but it was described as being shy and friendly, and for some reason when I was reading about it, Ace just popped into my head. I do think Ace puts up a punky facade to protect himself, and this can make him a little annoying. However, underneath that, we've got a boy who's a little self-conscious, someone who's perhaps a little shy to reveal his true feelings in some instances, maybe. But at the end of the day, he's really just a fun little guy who can connect to pretty much anyone over pretty much anything. So if he himself isn't the Sandown Clown, I think he absolutely could have encountered this being, made a joke about its costume, but then engaged in a pleasant exchange with the creature before both went about their day. Perhaps upon learning about the cryptid craze on campus, Ace realized that being he spoke to might be a cryptid itself, and he's been looking for them ever since, but to no avail since they no longer exist in this realm. Poor boy swears he talked with the clown, but no one believes him because of all the other talk about cryptids around campus, and I think Ace is also someone who occasionally tells tall tales, so in this instance, he's not getting believed. Poor thing. Moving into Savannah Claw, I gotta be honest, I don't think Leona can be bothered to engage with this craze at all. He's got better things to do than chase the tails of imaginary creatures, but if he had to pick one, then I guess it would be the Owlman. This cryptid has been described as England's Mothman since the two creatures function in similar ways and have similar aesthetics, but I don't think Leona's all that similar to either, to be honest. Perhaps he believes himself to be an omen of misfortune given his past and what others have said about him and his magic, but truthfully, the reason I made this connection is because Leona has a very easy cop-out, one that might even rival his wish for meat during the star sending, because Leona, when asked about this cryptid, can just show a picture of Neji and call it a day. Neji is not an owl beastman, he's a hornbill beastman, but he is a bird, and a bird is a bird is a bird as far as Leona is concerned. If questioned, he can go, oops, guess I got them confused, oh well, and he can go back to his nap or whatever he was doing. However, I do think this little interaction brings up a very good question about what sorts of cryptids would actually exist in Twist and whether creatures like the Owlman would just be considered monsters or beastmen or something entirely different. So thank you, Leona, for this philosophical conundrum, one that likely was answered in part at some point during the story, because if you think about it, creatures like the Owlman would just be owl beastmen in the Twist universe. So maybe at some point beastmen and even mermen were considered cryptids until they made better contact with other humans, and that's got nothing to do with the Fae either, but perhaps we should table that discussion for another section. Ruggie, similarly, isn't really out there hunting down critters or chasing anybody's tail. Instead, he's been trying to make a buck by spreading rumors of the Wampus Cat and offering paid tours to its lair. This is a con that he cooked up with Lucius to bring them both ball marks and fancy tuna, respectively. So it's really a win-win situation. Wampus cats are creatures from American folklore and are often described as somewhere between cat and dog with glowing eyes, who are either benevolent or mischievous depending on the context or account. Some accounts list it at the size of a Maine Coon, while others claim it to be more on the mountain lion side of size, but I think Ruggie could spin the particulars in a way that favors Lucius's physique for them to pull off this con together. In fact, there are a variety of different takes on the creature, both in popular culture and in folklore, so it's really up to Ruggie's imagination to fill in the blanks for this particular cryptid. I do think the two of them would be found out rather quickly, since Trey, being the dutiful cat dad he is, would recognize the extra weight Lucius had been gaining, as well as Lucius's disappearing more frequently, and the two would be reprimanded for their little stunt. Jack isn't as interested in the hunting aspect as he is the challenge one, because he heard there is a large muscular creature that lives at the tops of snowy mountains that can withstand blizzards, freezing temperatures, and other such hazards that humans normally fall prey to. A creature called the Yeti. And Jack is ready to challenge it to a race. This boy is all about improving himself, specifically in the physical realm, so once he heard that there were critters like the Yeti on the list, he's going after them with full determination. Now, Jack isn't one to profit off of this experience, nor do I think he cares about proving that the Yeti is real, perhaps. I honestly think he's just in it for the thrill of the challenge. During his search in the mountains, he's likely to encounter other obstacles which he can use for his training as well, so realistically, even if he doesn't find the Yeti, he's still going to get something out of the experience. We also know from the second Fairy Gala that Jack has trained in snow before, and we have a lot of other contextual evidence of him being from a snowy part of the Shacklands. Therefore, it's probably likely that Jack heard about the Yeti before and now just has an excuse to go after it. Both are also pretty tall guys that are also a bit fuzzy, so to speak, so they share that sort of resemblance too, which is something I think Grimm definitely teases Jack about. While discussing this mountain critter, I imagine Jade would also materialize to talk about the mountains and give pointers to Jack for his expedition as well. A real team effort, this one. Now then, moving into Octavinelle, as for Azul, it's only natural for him to be likened to and to be hunting, in his own way, the Pacific Northwest tree octopus. Being an octopus himself, it's only natural that his shared kinship would aid him in this quest to uncover the elusive arboreal critter, if of course it was real. Naturally, these creatures are also totally not a hoax cooked up by Azul that may or may not have been prompted by the Monster Lounge during the cryptid craze to profit off of monster hunters. No, never. According to Azul, these critters are a rare and dying breed of cephalopod that live on land, specifically in trees, and the last known population exists exclusively on Sage's Island. Because of their dwindling numbers, only other octopi are in the know about this species, of course. But given the cryptid craze, Azul thought it best to reveal this secret lest any of his brethren be hurt by wayward hunters. Naturally, the trio set up some dummy octopi dolls that they animated with magic to breathe some life into this hoax, and it hooked quite a few kiddos before the group was found out. In our world, this was also an interesting hoax with a very similar story. In Washington state, there was said to be a population of tree-dwelling octopi who made their way onto land from the Puget Sound. Their population was allegedly endangered by habitat destruction, and so started the conservation efforts to preserve the species. I originally found out about these creatures from a website exercise I did in middle school that was meant to teach us how to identify legitimate and illegitimate online sources. And the webpage we visited is not only still up, but the very first search result for these creatures. It's a very fun read that I highly recommend, and I think Azul, after being found out for his scam, would use a similar academic excuse to smooth things over with customers. At the end of the day, I think the limited time menu would have gone from legitimate interest to fun joke, and since all the food is delicious, it's quite easy to forgive Azul for his deception. Jade is quite terrifying himself, so there is very little I think he'd be afraid of, meaning he could reasonably hunt down any number of cryptids. Like the Walker of Skin wouldn't scare him at all, given that he's already talked to a not Floyd during Halloween when he was little, which isn't the same exact situation, but it is similar, and I can only imagine the critter getting more than they bargained for if they tried to take Jade's form instead. Jade would literally tear it apart just to see how it functioned like a mad scientist, and I don't think that those creatures, even with their supposed malevolence, would want that. So instead, I'm tying Jade's cryptid to his beloved mountains, to the woods he holds so dear to his heart, to the not deer. Even though these creatures aren't specifically aggressive, I do think they are one of the creepiest cryptids out there because there's just something so off about them. In fact, that's their entire shtick. They're a deer, but not quite actually a deer. Something in between, like a not deer. Sometimes it's subtle, sometimes it isn't, but it's always unnerving to see something you expect to be one thing turn into something else the more you look at it or the closer you get to it. Something known and unknown at the same time. A living paradox, so to speak. I feel like Jade is very similar in that he projects a certain image for himself while hiding his true intentions. Ever the gentleman, but not actually a gentleman. Concerned and caring, but not actually either of those things. And when you finally do glimpse his unknown side, it's hard to not feel unnerved. I also think Jade's actually run into these cryptids before during his mountain journeys and not even really registered it since deer are already foreign critters to him. Eventually he came to figure out the difference, and now he considers these cryptids novelties on his ventures. Even if he hasn't run into one before, he's absolutely using this legend to scare his hiking partners when he gets bored. There's no way he hasn't pulled a stop dead in my tracks on the trail with my new hiking companion to stare at a deer before slowly backing away and claiming, "This isn't right." And he has the audacity to wonder why no one else joins his club. Honestly, can you believe this guy? Floyd, on the other hand, isn't hunting a cryptid. He is one. And I think he gets such a kick out of scaring kiddos on campus that head to the lake that totally exists on Sage's Island to try to find fish cryptids, only to have a weed-covered Floyd jump scare them from the depths. In this universe, I foresee Floyd fully taking on the persona of the Honey Island swamp monster, or Lechi, as it's called, and completely terrifying anyone who comes across him. Sure, this creature is supposed to be an amphibious Bigfoot that wanders around outside the water, but I think Floyd could pull off that aspect too. So long as it's the dead of night and he's covered in a blanket of various water weeds, he can absolutely scare some unsuspecting victims who are prowling near the lake. Jade might even help wrangle curious kiddos for his brother to scare, feigning fear with them and pretending that he's never seen such a creature, even in the depths of the sea. They might even have this as a little side gig when they're not busy faking the tree octopus. Outside of these hypotheticals, I think any swamp or sea monster could easily be connected to Floyd given his mer nature and propensity for chaos. Even just spooking some unsuspecting hunters with his mere presence sounds like a delightful afternoon for him, so I figure this classic cryptid, which works both on land and sea, would be the perfect one for him. Arabia is up next and Kalim is up first, and I struggled a bit with pinning down a specific cryptid for him to search for. Eventually, I decided on the river dino because I think he'd have a delightful time walking along the river looking for this critter in the bushes along the bank. I feel like Jamil would have convinced him to go after this specific cryptid because it's easier to keep an eye on him near the river rather than in the middle of a forest or atop a frigid mountain. Rivers are also dangerous, however, as long as a safe distance is kept from the water and the weather forecast was checked ahead of time to reduce flooding, then I think it'd be a relatively safe environment for Kalim. Speaking of Kalim, I think he really just wants to make friends with the river dino and possibly add it to his collection of parade animals, probably assuming he can convince it to be friends with the promise of parties or something similar. To be fair, if I was a river dino and Kalim was offering me a life of luxury in exchange for walking a bit every once in a while, maybe doing a trick or two, I'd be down. I also, for some reason, cannot separate Kalim from water due to Oasis Maker, and it always plays some sort of role in the connections I make for these videos. I think here it's a rather obvious why the river dino specifically was chosen, but I do think the safety concerns are also a valid reason to give him something more benign like this to be his obsession for this fad. Jamil, though, I think deserves to be hunting something reptile-esque as well, but there are a lot of different reptile-adjacent cryptids, so narrowing it down was a bit difficult. I think him also hunting for the river dinos would make sense so he could keep an eye on Kalim, but it'd be a bit of a cop-out just to give them the same thing, no? So during my search, I was reminded about saurians or reptilians, and I think they're the perfect cryptid for Jamil to be after that will also allow him to keep tabs on Kalim. These reptile humanoids have tons of conspiracy theories surrounding them, where they're involved in governments and politics and secret societies, and or just manipulating humanity and those sorts of things are absolutely Jamil's vibe. He is certainly smart enough to be a spy or involved in some of those deeply classified government missions, especially with his unique magic. So rather than give him a giant snake, I figured these creatures would be a better comparison. Manipulation is a theme that I see with conspiracies surrounding saurians, and given that Jamil can mind control folks and knows how to manipulate conversations even without this magic, I think if he were to meet some of these lizard folk, they'd have a nice little plotting session. Plus, I think Jamil could argue with Kalim that the river dinos are actually saurians to turn their little hunt into a friendly competition, where Jamil can relax a little bit while Kalim is occupied. I don't think he cares to win this particular battle, but if he can get some downtime out of it, then that's a reason enough to try. Next up is Pamfiore, and I honestly think that Vil would have absolutely no time for this sort of hunting whatsoever. I cannot envision him caring about cryptids at all, regardless of their true existence, and I doubt he'd spend his time searching for them unless it was part of a film contract. This is where Rook enters, stage left, to convince Vil that the hunt would provide some good social media content during the lead up to Halloween, and an excellent opportunity for the Film Research Club to practice night filming and or special effects. With this refined goal, I think Vil would be on the hunt or recreating for a film the Lucia, a legendary sea monster from the Caribbean that's said to be part megalodon, part kraken. I think the main thing that caused me to connect these two is the movie Jaws, which I think Vil could be using this sort of creature to emulate or recreate in Twisted Wonderland fashion. He might even have been able to convince Azul to do some practical effect acting in exchange for some social media promotion of the Monstro Lounge's limited time cryptid venue. I think the researching and recreation of this creature could be a really fun challenge for the film club and could help Vil or his club members branch out from the typical types of stories they seem to cover, as the few vignettes we have of the club seem to focus on more of a classic hero saving the day type of plot. A thriller like Jaws doesn't necessarily need a clear-cut hero in shiny armor and can instead center the story around the encounters with the beast. Or he could even create a B-rated horror film like Sci-Fi's Sharktopus too, so which honestly might appeal more to the students of NRC, but It is up to Vil and the club to determine the exact specifics of the film they are creating with this cryptid. Rook, on the other hand, is on the lookout for the Devil Bird, which is said to be a beast of the night whose howls will curl any listener's blood. I think Rook would have heard tales of this creature's unique vocal performance and decided that he needed to hear it for himself, regardless of whether such sounds were an omen of death. It is theorized that this bird in our world could be any number of owls, hawks, eagles, or buzzards, but these birds generically also connect to Rook given his huntsman nature. So I can see him being just as interested in the real birds and trying to narrow down which species is the culprit of the Devil Bird legends. He is no stranger to crawling through bushes or climbing trees, and I think he could search for any number of cryptids easily, but I think that this one stands out because it is not only related to the hunt, but also, in a way, to song. Rook is first and foremost a theater kid. He even states as much in his vampire costume vignette when he regales tales of the play that changed his life forever. Given this, I think he'd be searching for a siren or some other musically or theatrically gifted cryptid, and since the Devil Bird could connect to both the song and the hunt, it just fit Rook in my mind. He may even be trying to save the bird from its misinformed name by making it less mysterious, or he just simply wishes to witness the beauty of its cry. I cannot say for sure, but I do think it suits him overall and would be something he could easily go after. Epel's going after Bigfoot, and he's demanding answers about how this cryptid got so dang tall, because there is no way an herbivore that essentially eats only leaves gets to be that tall and muscular, while Epel eats all sorts of food and stays short and small. It is simply not fair. Therefore, I think Epel would try to find Bigfoot in order to solve some of those height and muscle-related mysteries while challenging himself a bit too. Harveston is also a snowy area, so I think Epel would be aware of legends like the Yeti. However, I don't think he necessarily is up to the level of mountaineering the Yeti requires, and I think, too, he might have rationalized that specific cryptid as a local legend rather than a real creature. Bigfoot, on the other hand, is the same thing but in warmer climates, and I think upon learning that this was the case, Epel might have had a small existential crisis, which led to his fascination with this creature and its cousins. Perhaps they evolved alongside humans and can provide the key to further human evolutions, or maybe they just would be a really good source of fertilizer that could help with the apple farming. Or maybe Epel just wants to disprove it just to rationalize the Yeti as well. There are so many routes he could be going down, but regardless of his actual motivations, I think he, like Jack, is going full throttle into the hunt. This would likely hinder his efforts, as I believe Bigfoot is generally non-confrontational and Epel is extra confrontational, so who knows what'll happen. What I do know, though, is that Rook will be there and he will be recording the entire thing, so we'll have something entertaining to watch afterwards. Moving into Ignihide, we'll be starting off with Idia, and Idia is on the lookout for the legendary Squonk, simply because catching these critters is logistically impossible, so it is very easy for Idia to quit the pursuit early so he can return to his room and play his MMOs. How could a creature that may exist somehow be logistically impossible to catch? Well, you see, Squonks are creatures whose skin is much too big for their frames, and this wrinkled, warty appearance distresses them so much that they cry constantly and flee constantly lest they be perceived. This fear is second to none, which makes catching a glimpse of the creature nearly impossible. Even if you do somehow manage to track them down and convince them you mean them no physical or emotional harm, they still end up turning into a puddle of tears that's extremely hard to transport if you don't first get them into a bucket. One could argue that knowing this, Idia could have brought a bucket with him to this adventure, and to be fair, I think he would. Of course, Idia would also be bringing some food coloring and plastic eyeballs to make the lake water he scooped up much more convincingly Squonk-esque, so that he can turn it in and escape back to his room. Aside from the easy out, this creature and Idia are both a bit gloomy, both a bit flighty, and both are quite concerned with being perceived. We see Idia try to get out of social engagements all the time. His ceremonial robes vignette kind of revolves around that concept, and when he is forced into the public eye, he gets very self-conscious and very concerned. These factors, I think, relate him to this creature, and perhaps someone even chose the Squonk to be his target because of their similarities. I mean, if anyone's got a chance to convince an introvert that they're chill, it's certainly another introvert, no? Who else could effortlessly sit in relative silence on their phone in the presence of another person who is also on their phone, and both end up considering that a successful and enriching shared experience? So Idia and his fake squonk are going to be hanging out near the lake, listening to the waves lap against the shore as the soft cries of MMO foes emit from Idia's phone. Such tranquility. Ortho, on the other hand, I think would be really invested in capturing footage of a cryptid and either proving or disproving their existence with his search. I think given his nature, the Fresno night crawlers would be his target of choice. The only thing I knew about these cryptids before researching this video is that they are silly little guys, and Ortho is too a silly little guy, so the connection was natural for my brain to make. After researching them, I still do not understand what they are, which is kind of lovely given that the nature of these types of things is for them to be mysterious, but there are many possible explanations for these creatures that range from aliens to deer, so honestly it's kind of anyone's guess. However, given their tiny torso and long legs, there are quite a few hoaxes that have popped up using several different methods to craft these creatures, which leads me to believe that Ortho, being as interested in film research as he is, and as interested in science as he is, would use this opportunity to educate the masses on just how easy it is to create fake footage by creating his own Fresno night crawlers. I can also see Ortho's devious side coming out as he pranks other campers and cryptid hunters with his fake night crawlers, spooking them here and there before debunking the project with rational explanations. On to Deosomnia now, and it is here that we run into a bit of a problem. Well, a bit more of a problem. You see, Malleus isn't hunting any cryptids because he is one, and not in the funny haha way that Floyd was. Technically, dragons fall into this category somehow, someway. So instead of trying to prove his own existence, I think he's just gonna chill with his grandma, get some family bonding time in, that sort of thing. They, on the whole, can fall into the cryptid category because there are various creatures that fall under that umbrella, including dwarves, that are or have been classified as cryptids at some point in time. And these creatures take on different forms depending on the context in which they are discussed, so it's a little bit of a mess. When we get introduced to Twisted Wonderland, the Fae are a known species, and while they are still somewhat mysterious, no one is debating their existence. However, that wasn't always the case, as we can see in Lilia's dream during his early travels, where his mere presence caused a whole town to riot. There was a point in time where the Fae were monsters of legend, and dragons too still kind of are considered to be fantastical creatures, given games like Roaring Drago, which likely weren't meant to teach humans how to take care of real Fae like Malleus. Even during Lilia's travels, finding other dragons was a task in and of itself. So this line of to exist or not exist in universe, specifically with dragons, is very blurry. By technicality, Malleus the dragon is like the cryptid dragon, and that's where I'm going to leave him here. I also think it's extremely funny for Malleus to be walking around campus seeing all his classmates discuss cryptid hunting and trying to find these elusive creatures when Malleus is just standing right there among them. I don't know why, but this just feels like a canon event. Bonus points if they were discussing dragons and Mal chimes in with a sarcastic, yes, what elusive creatures dragons are. Hopefully you find one in your travels. And then they just don't get it. In the same vein, I think Lilia is out here giving folks all sorts of tips about how to find cryptids, because he's run into so many of them while searching for a way to hatch Malleus, and no one is taking him seriously because there's no way this cute little guy won an arm wrestling match with the Yeti. Oh, Lilia, you jokester. While Lilia also won't be hunting down any cryptids, I do think he's going to take this opportunity to go visit his good friend, the Mothman, because these two just seem like they would vibe. The Mothman is touted as a sign of misfortune, for wherever he appears, disaster is soon to follow. However, Mothman himself is not the cause of these events, or is at least speculated to not be the cause of the events, and is much more regarded, I believe, as the omen rather than the actual misfortune. Instead, he is simply a warning, and while there are a variety of theories out there as to why this is, no one really knows for sure. What we do know for sure is that Mothman's become an undeniable pop culture icon, with an entire festival dedicated to his existence that takes place in his hometown. Lilia's not that revered, but he absolutely had a journey from terrifying General of the Right, who brings nothing but misfortune to the Silver Owls, to a cute little grandpa who plays harmless pranks and takes care of his adopted children. To me, the shift between Mothman's mythical status to pop icon is very similar to Lilia's shift from General to Grandpa, and I can't help but feel like the two would just vibe. Both are creatures of the night, which I think would have been important initially for them having met, and then later they just became good friends. Plus, I think they both would get a chuckle out of NRC's cryptid craze. In that same sort of vein, I think Silver absolutely encountered a unicorn before, being the Disney princess that he is, and he just didn't think much of it at the time since he's a friend to all of the forest critters. I think during the cryptid craze, he'd just relay his experience to others and also try to give them tips, only to have most folks assume that his encounter with the unicorn was just a dream. Unicorns, from my memory, typically only reveal themselves to those with pure hearts, which I think really suits Silver's vibe. Yes, he's a warrior, yes, he can be confrontational, and he's not a doormat, but he is still very soft and very conscientious of others in his own way. Given that, I think he is the perfect candidate to have an encounter with a unicorn. I also feel like the Briar Valley is probably one of the very few places in Twisted Wonderland where unicorns could exist in peace, because I feel like the Fae would absolutely let them be or ask very kindly for their hair or other alchemical ingredients if they needed to. I can't help but feel like they would also just respect the unicorn's choice in the matter as well, given how nature-centric they are and respect those boundaries. Silver, too, is someone, I think, who does respect boundaries and is the least likely of the Twist Boys to try to use the unicorn for profit or for his own power. Honestly, young Silver probably shared some berries with the unicorn, probably thinking it was a weird-looking horse, and then in return it gave him some of its hair, which he proudly took back home to Lilia. Something along the lines of, "This pretty horse gave me some of its hair, but I think you should have it since it's nice," and Lilia just stares at it for a good minute, piecing things together and processing the interaction before happily accepting and keeping the locks in a very secure place. While Silver is off recounting his tale of rainbows and sunshine, Sebek is getting his hands dirty searching for the infamous sewer alligator. I think Lilia might have jokingly told Sebek that these alligators are a long-lost magical creature who had to hide from humans in sewers to avoid being captured and having their teeth pulled, and little Becky just ran with it. He may wish to find them to help them, given their similar natures as a crocodile and alligator respectively, or he's trying to find one to show Malleus just how capable of a retainer he is, as being able to find even the most elusive of creatures must be a skill that he needs to have in order to be a good retainer for his lord. I'm not entirely sure what Sebek's true motivations are in the matter, but he's definitely going at it full force while Lilia chuckles in the background. The other meta reason I gave Sebek this cryptid is because, technically, he's kind of its cousin. I mean, in Glorious Masquerade, Sebek does become a sewer crocodile by virtue of falling into the underground waterways, so I think there might be a bit of kinship between these two, but that's about as deep as this connection gets. As time goes on, the cryptid craze on campus diminishes and a new fad takes over. But regardless of the boys failing, succeeding, or profiting off of finding these critters, I hope y'all enjoyed a glimpse into their respective searches. If you did, please leave a comment with your thoughts down below, and if you have other cryptids you think the boys should have searched for or been compared to, leave them there as well. If comments aren't your thing, you could always like and subscribe instead, and before you go, I just have to remind you that you're amazing, and I hope you have a wonderful day.